My fiancée dumped me over red flags that her best friend pointed out to her. Weeks later, that same friend messaged me, "You deserve better," with me. And everything finally made total sense then. My fiancée broke up with me because her best friend called me a walking red flag. But weeks later, when that same friend texted me asking to grab coffee because I deserved better, I knew what unfolded next would expose a level of manipulation I never saw coming. I'm Daniel, 29, a system analyst living in Denver, and I'm sharing this because I need you to understand how easily someone can dismantle your world, right under your nose, until it's already shattered. 5 years. That's how long Chloe and I were together. 5 years of building something I genuinely believed was solid, something real, something that felt like coming home. We met at a coffee shop. She was sketching in a corner booth, and I was, honestly, just trying to figure out how to talk to her without looking like a complete idiot. She was everything I wasn't: outgoing, spontaneous, always surrounded by people. I was the guy who'd rather spend Friday night gaming with my online crew than hitting up crowded downtown bars. We balanced each other out. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself when things started to feel off. We moved in together after 2 years. Got a rescue dog named Rocket, who had 3 legs and more personality than most humans I knew. And I proposed last spring at that same coffee shop because, yeah, I'm apparently that kind of sentimental guy. Chloe said yes before I even finished the question, and for about 3 months after that, everything felt perfect. Like we'd finally cracked the code to doing life right. Then Scarlett came back into the picture. And I mean really came back. Not just occasional texts or birthday calls, but suddenly, she was everywhere. Every plan, every decision, every conversation seemed to involve Scarlett. She was Chloe's best friend from college. The kind of friendship with years of history I could never fully grasp, inside jokes, shared experiences that predated me by a decade. I didn't mind at first. Everyone needs friends, and I'm not the kind of guy who gets jealous of his fiancée having a life outside our relationship. But Scarlett had this way of making me feel like I was constantly failing some test I didn't even know I was taking. Little comments, seemingly harmless on the surface, but each one left me feeling a little smaller. She'd interrupt me mid-sentence when I was talking to Chloe, not even rudely, just casually, like what I was saying wasn't important enough to finish. She'd roll her eyes when Chloe mentioned plans we'd made, a beach camping trip or checking out that gaming convention I'd been excited about for months. The worst part wasn't what Scarlett said to me. It was what she said to Chloe when I wasn't around. Seeds she planted that I wouldn't discover until way too late. It started small. Plans getting cancelled last minute because Scarlett needed Chloe for some emergency that never quite sounded like an actual emergency when I heard about it later. We were supposed to go to that gaming convention, tickets bought 3 months in advance, hotel booked, whole weekend planned out. Then Scarlett called, crying about some guy who ghosted her. Suddenly, Chloe was cancelling everything to go comfort her best friend. I said it was fine, because what else was I supposed to say? But it kept happening. Pattern after pattern of me coming second to whatever crisis Scarlett was manufacturing that week. The beach camping trip got scrapped because Scarlett wanted Chloe to go to some wellness retreat that cost $800 and sounded suspiciously like a pyramid scheme disguised as self-care. Chloe started using phrases that didn't sound like her. Stuff like emotional labor, weaponized incompetence, and love bombing. She never explained what they meant or gave specific examples, she just dropped them into conversations like grenades and waited for me to apologize for things I didn't understand I was doing wrong. When I asked her to explain, she'd get defensive and say I was invalidating her feelings, which, again, was a phrase that didn't sound like something she'd come up with on her own. I started noticing Scarlett's influence everywhere. In the way Chloe suddenly cared about things she'd never mentioned before, in the way she'd repeat opinions almost word for word from conversations I knew they'd had without me. Chloe used to love our quiet evenings at home, cooking together, watching whatever show we were binging. But Scarlett kept telling her that staying home was boring and that I was isolating her from experiences, even though Chloe was always the one who suggested staying in. I'm an introvert. I've always been upfront about that. I work a demanding job that drains my social battery, and I recharge by having quiet time, gaming with my crew, taking Rocket for long walks where I don't have to perform for anyone. Chloe knew this about me from day one. She said she loved that I was low-key, stable, and didn't need constant entertainment. But suddenly, Scarlett was in her ear, telling her that my personality was actually a red flag and that I was controlling her social life by not wanting to go out every single night. The gaslighting was so subtle, I didn't even recognize it until months later when I could finally see the whole picture. One night, Chloe came home from drinks with Scarlett and told me we needed to talk. I knew from her tone that this wasn't going to be a normal conversation about bills or weekend plans. She sat down on the couch, wouldn't look me in the eye, and started listing off things I apparently did wrong. Things I didn't even remember doing, or that were so twisted from what actually happened that I barely recognized the event she was describing. She said I was dismissive of her needs because I'd gone to bed early one night when she wanted to watch a movie, never mind that I'd worked a 12-hour shift fixing a critical system failure and was barely functional. She said I was financially controlling because I asked if we should maybe budget better after she spent $600 on concert tickets for her and Scarlett without mentioning it first. She said I didn't support her dreams because I suggested she maybe finish her graphic design certification before quitting her stable job to freelance full-time with 0 clients lined up. Every accusation had Scarlett's fingerprints all over it. I could practically hear her voice saying these things, but Chloe delivered them like they were her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own conclusions about who I was as a partner. I tried to defend myself, but every response I gave just seemed to prove her point somehow. Like the game was rigged and I was always going to lose no matter what I said. When I pointed out that I'd supported her career change and just wanted to make sure we had a financial safety net, she said I was mansplaining her own life to her. When I reminded her that I'd encouraged her to hang out with friends and never tried to stop her from going out, she said I was rewriting history and gaslighting her about my own controlling behavior. The words were coming out of Chloe's mouth, but they were Scarlett's words. Scarlett's interpretations. Scarlett's reality being forced onto our relationship like a filter that distorted everything we'd built together. That's when I realized my relationship had a third person in it. And that third person had more influence over my fiancé than I ever would. There was nothing I could do to compete with years of friendship, trust, and history that existed long before I ever came into the picture. The breaking point came on a Thursday in October. I woke up feeling like someone had replaced my blood with concrete and set my throat on fire. My temperature was 102 degrees, which explained why even lifting my head off the pillow felt like climbing a mountain. I texted Chloe, asking if she could maybe grab some medicine on her way home from work because I genuinely didn't think I could make it to the pharmacy without passing out. She read the message. I saw the little red receipt pop up. And then nothing for 3 hours, while I lay there, alternating between sweating through my sheets and shivering so hard my teeth chattered. When she finally came home, she had Scarlett with her. That should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to go the way I hoped. Instead of checking on me or asking what I needed, she stood in the doorway of our bedroom with her arms crossed, like I'd personally offended her by being sick. Scarlett was right behind her, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. And then Chloe said the words that I still can't fully believe came out of her mouth. She said that Scarlett thought I was being manipulative by asking for help, and that I was a grown man who should be able to take care of myself without making it her responsibility. I just stared at her, because what do you even say to that? How do you respond when your fiancé tells you that needing basic support during an illness is actually emotional manipulation? Before I could form any kind of coherent response, she grabbed her overnight bag from the closet and said she was staying at Scarlett's place for a few days because she needed space from my toxic behavior. The worst part wasn't even that she left. It was the petty cruelty of what she took with her. She grabbed the thermometer off my nightstand and the last roll of toilet paper from the bathroom. Which sounds almost funny when I say it out loud, but in that moment, it felt like she was deliberately trying to make my life harder, just to prove some point I didn't understand. I heard the apartment door close, and then it was just me and Rocket, who jumped up on the bed and put his head on my chest like he knew something was really wrong this time. Not just the regular kind of wrong, but the kind that changes everything. I managed to get myself to the kitchen and found some expired ibuprofen in the back of a drawer. Took twice the recommended dose because I was desperate. And then I did something I almost never do. I reached out to my online gaming crew and told them what was happening. These were guys I'd been playing with for years, people I'd never met in person, but who knew me better than most of my real-life friends. Within an hour, 3 of them had sent food delivery to my apartment. And one of them, Aaron, who actually lived in Denver, showed up with a care package of medicine, Gatorade, and soup his wife had made. He sat in my living room for 2 hours, making sure I ate something and didn't die, while I explained the whole situation with Chloe and Scarlett, and how I felt like I was losing my mind trying to understand what I'd done wrong. Aaron listened to everything, then said something that stuck with me. He said it sounded like Chloe had outsourced her thinking to someone who didn't have her best interests at heart, and that sometimes people get so deep into toxic friendships they can't see how much damage is being done until it's too late. I spent the next 3 days recovering alone, except for Rocket and the friends who checked in on me. That gave me way too much time to think about everything that had happened over the past year. All the little moments I'd ignored or explained away because I loved Chloe and wanted to believe we could work through anything. On the 4th day, she came back to the apartment while I was at work. I knew she'd been there because half her stuff was gone, and there was a note on the counter. In her handwriting, yes, but using vocabulary that I recognized as Scarlett's specialty. The note talked about emotional labor and how I'd failed to meet her needs, and how she deserved a partner who didn't make her responsible for managing my feelings. Which was ironic, considering I'd spent the last year walking on eggshells, trying not to upset her while she criticized everything I did through Scarlett's lens of what a relationship should look like. That evening, Chloe texted me, asking to talk in person. We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from our apartment, because apparently our home wasn't neutral enough territory for this conversation. She had this rehearsed quality to the way she spoke, like she'd practiced these lines with Scarlett until they sounded natural. She went through a whole list of my red flags, which included things like me being too independent, not emotionally available enough, prioritizing my career over her needs, and something about how my introversion was actually an avoidant attachment style, which apparently she'd learned about from some podcasts Scarlett had recommended. I listened to all of it, realizing I was basically being broken up with using pop psychology terms and therapy speak that had been weaponized to make normal human behavior sound like pathology. And when she finally paused to take a breath, I asked her one question, whether any of these thoughts were actually hers, or if she was just repeating what Scarlett had told her to think. She got defensive immediately and said I was invalidating her experience and proving her point about being dismissive. Then she said she needed me to move out of the apartment, even though my name was the only one on the lease and I'd been paying 70% of the rent for 3 years. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was almost impressive. I told her very calmly that I'd be happy to give her time to find a new place, since this was my apartment and I wasn't going anywhere. She didn't like that answer. I could see her mentally scrambling to figure out how to regain control. She made one last attempt by saying we could work things out if I was willing to go to therapy and address my issues. I asked what issues specifically, and she couldn't give me concrete examples, just more buzzwords about emotional unavailability, stonewalling, and defensive behavior. And I realized right there, in that coffee shop, that I'd already lost her months ago to someone who saw our relationship as a threat to her own holdover Chloe. I said, okay. I told her she had 2 weeks to get her remaining stuff out of the apartment, and I walked away from 5 years like it was the easiest decision I'd ever made. Even though inside, I felt like someone had scooped up my chest and left nothing but empty space where my future used to be. The next morning, I woke up to a text saying she'd thought about it overnight and we were definitely over. She'd be by that afternoon with Scarlett to collect her things. I didn't respond because there was nothing left to say. When they showed up, Scarlett had this smug look on her face, like she'd won some competition I didn't know we were having. And I just stood there, watching them pack up pieces of my life into boxes and bags. After they left, the apartment felt enormous and suffocating at the same time. Too quiet and too full of memories that now felt contaminated by everything that had happened. I did what I always do when life gets overwhelming. I threw myself into work and started going to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning before my shift, because physical exhaustion was easier to deal with than emotional devastation. My online crew checked in on me constantly. Aaron invited me to his house for dinner with his family twice a week. And slowly, I started rebuilding some version of a life that didn't revolve around making Chloe happy or trying to meet standards that kept changing based on whatever Scarlett decided was acceptable that week. About 2 weeks after the breakup, Chloe showed up at my door unannounced with Rocket on a leash. She said she couldn't handle taking care of him anymore because he kept whining and wouldn't eat, and she realized she'd only taken him to hurt me in the first place. I took him back without a word, because I wasn't about to punish my dog for her mistakes. And honestly, having Rocket back made the apartment feel less empty, like I'd recovered at least one piece of what we'd built together. 3 weeks passed in total, and I was actually starting to feel okay. Not great, but functional. And then Chloe started texting me again with weird messages that started casual and progressively got stranger. She'd ask my opinion on things she'd never cared about before. She'd mention how Scarlett was being really intense lately and maybe they were spending too much time together, like she was testing the waters to see if I'd take her back. I kept my responses short and polite, because I'm not cruel and we'd shared 5 years of life together. But I wasn't about to fall back into that trap of being her emotional support while Scarlett pulled the strings behind the scenes. Then I got a message from the last person I ever expected. A message that made me realize this whole situation was so much worse and so much stranger than I'd ever imagined. And it came from Scarlett herself. The message came through on a Saturday morning while I was meal prepping. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, or maybe her account had been hacked, because there was no universe where this made sense. She said Chloe had been struggling since the breakup, and that watching us fall apart had made Scarlett realize some things about herself, about me, about what she actually wanted. And then she said the words that made my brain completely short-circuit. She said I deserved better than someone who couldn't appreciate what I brought to a relationship. I stared at my phone for a solid minute, trying to process what was happening. Then another message came through, this one with a selfie of Scarlett at some coffee shop, with the caption asking if I wanted to grab drinks sometime and talk about everything that had happened, because she felt terrible about how things had gone down. The audacity was so staggering that I actually laughed out loud. This woman had systematically destroyed my relationship over the course of a year, convinced my fiancé that I was toxic and controlling and every other buzzword she could weaponize. And now she was shooting her shot like we were potential romantic interests who'd just met at a bar. I screenshotted everything immediately and sent it to Aaron, because I needed someone else to confirm I wasn't hallucinating this situation. He responded within seconds, saying this was the most unhinged thing he'd seen in his entire life and that I needed to be very careful about how I handled it. Over the next 2 days, Scarlett kept messaging me, escalating from casual coffee suggestions to more overtly flirty comments about how she'd always thought I was attractive and intelligent, and that Chloe had been too immature to recognize what she had. She said we'd always had chemistry and that she'd held back out of loyalty to Chloe, but now that we were both single, there was no reason we couldn't explore what could happen between us. The whole thing felt like I was trapped in some psychological thriller where the villain reveals themselves in the third act. I showed everything to Aaron, and 2 other friends from my gaming crew who lived local, Michael and Christopher, guys I'd finally met in person after years of online friendship. We spent an entire evening trying to figure out what Scarlett's actual angle was, because this couldn't just be about wanting to date me. Michael had a theory that made way too much sense. He said some people are addicted to control and drama, and that Scarlett had probably gotten bored once she'd successfully broken up me and Chloe, because there was no more chaos to orchestrate. He thought maybe Scarlett saw me as a challenge now, someone who'd rejected her influence and walked away with dignity, and that trying to date me was really about proving she could still manipulate my life if she wanted to. Christopher pointed out something even darker, that if Scarlett succeeded in getting me to go out with her, it would destroy any chance of Chloe and I ever reconciling. And it would also position Scarlett as the person who ended up with the prize after convincing Chloe to throw it away. The more we talked about it, the more I realized this wasn't about attraction or genuine interest. This was about power and control, and feeding whatever psychological needs Scarlett had to be at the center of other people's relationships. I decided I wasn't going to just ignore her or block her number. I was going to expose exactly who she was to everyone who'd been pulled into her orbit. But I needed to be smart about it, because going on the attack without proof would just make me look like the bitter ex she'd already painted me as to Chloe. I started documenting everything. Every message Scarlett sent got screenshotted with timestamps, and I reached out to a few people in Chloe's social circle who I'd stayed friendly with, to ask if they'd noticed anything weird about Scarlett's behavior over the years. 2 of them came back with stories that made my blood run cold, because apparently, I wasn't the first relationship Scarlett had torpedoed. One woman told me about her own ex-boyfriend 3 years ago, who Scarlett had convinced was emotionally abusive, using the same playbook of therapy speak and pop psychology to create problems where none existed. That relationship had ended with her isolated from the guy, who she later realized had been perfectly good to her.